I'm Doreen and I'm coming from KNUST, Ghana. I'm a lecturer there and I also practice in intellectual property rights, particularly for trademarks and copyright. And my research focuses more on Ghana, even though it ends up conducting a comparative study of the main topic. So my topic is Ghana's copyright framework and AI, assessing fair practice and legal exceptions in contemporary creative process. The main, should I say, research question or purpose for this research is to find a way that could openly allow a liberal or openly promote a liberal and ethical utilization of copyright protected work in creative processes, particularly when it comes to educational uses and knowledge impartation processes. And large language models like LLMs are being used by AI tools and companies to transform creative works and academic and informational industries. And they operate by injecting massive data sets, which it's well known, drawn from publicly available works. And these include both copyright protected works and those that are not copyright, may not be protected by copyright. And they use them to train their language prediction capacities for the LLMs. And this process raises a profound legal question as to whether the indiscriminate use poses any threats of copyright infringement, because most or in most instances, it has no explicit licenses or does not seek consent from the copyright owners. And particularly focusing on Ghana, I'm checking how these practices can either be shielded under exceptional uses, which we use fair practice. So my focus is on the exceptions, the LNEs, fair practice exceptions, and I do a comparative study with other jurisdictions that also look at fair use, particularly the UK. So the inquiry is to delve deep into the Ghana copyright law. And the issue has come up and keeps bubbling up as to the extent of mining data into detail by other AI organizations or tools, AI owners and tools in using copyright protected work. And some people had thought whether the Ghanaian copyright statutes can cater for that under the exceptions and limitations for users. And that is where I probe in, because there is a major problem and issues there that brings up for consideration. And my essence is not necessarily to advocate for the passage of a new AI statute or in any way, but to find a way, particularly focusing on the essence and the value in synchronizing or inculcating data mining into academic works and trainings that are related to educational purposes, finding a way to accommodate their ethical and liberal users and that are exceptions and limitations. So the main question is whether Ghana's fair practice exceptions and limitations can reasonably be interpreted to permit or restrict such AI-driven activities. And I note and stress that the question here is not just of technical or academic significance, but it also brings out the practical consequences in these activities or processes, because where there's a misalignment between the technological realities and how fast it's growing and the statutory language, as in the current state of our copyright law, then we risk either stifling local innovation or exposing Ghanaian authors or copyright owners, and in particular, cultural industries and the TCEs or TKs to unjust exploitation. So then how should we harness positively by resolving deep data mining and copyright protected works by AI? And I do this first by embarking on a bit of an exploratory inquiry into how other jurisdictions may have attempted similar approaches. I use the EU approach, and they've made some, should I say, headway, prominent one by passing the first kind of AI statutes, and they explicitly have codified exceptions for text and data mining under the Article 3 and 4 of the DMC directive, which recognizes the legitimacy of such processes, provided that right holders are afforded the opt-out mechanism. Then I explore the US statute, the US approach that does not necessarily at this stage have any statute regulating it, still relying on the flexibility of their fair use doctrine. And there I analyze how it developed and how they dwelt, even though it conforms to the three-step test, it conforms significantly to transform, or they stress significantly on the transformative use of the work. And in applying that particularly to the Ghanaian position, I realized from our statute that transformative use of copyright protected works under our Section 5, which deals with the exclusive economic rights, reserves any form of transformative use of a copyright protected work as an exclusive economic right for the rights holders. So I asked whether that is really an intentional inclusion or an oversight inclusion. And I weigh the two to see how it should be. And I suggest later on through the recommendations that we need to take a second look at it. And this is very important and timely because we are at a stage where Ghana is considering in Parliament to review the copyright law, either by thorough amendment or a total overhaul. So in doing that, these are some of the issues I bring up for policy consideration to consider AI and how well to handle it under the exceptions and limitations so that it opens up, we do not stifle technology and innovation, but then we opens out to see how we can have or be able to use it ethically to promote the good of science and technology in the creative industry. So I checked the US approach and I also explore the two African countries, Kenya and Nigeria, and I realized there hasn't been any direct, even though there has been discussions ongoing so far, there hasn't been any direct statutes being passed, which is, even though that's not my approach for Ghana, I only seek for us to have a way to accommodate it under our copyright statutes when we are overhauling or amending it significantly. And in doing that, through the methodology, I assess some of the copyright justification theories like the personality theory, which underscores creators' moral rights and the inherent connection with their works, the labor theory, which grounds intellectual property rights, that's copyright, in creative efforts of individuals, and then the social planning theory, which views copyright as a tool to foster a just society and a rich intellectual and cultural commons, which is where I stress on the last so far. That stressing on these ones, we need to have a way to think of the impacts, the ultimate impacts that these technologies are having on society and find a way to merge them or meet halfway or create a balance with the copyright use. And in doing that, the best approach under the Ghanaian statute, as I say, is to consider them under the exceptions and limitations, which we have fair practice. But unfortunately, now delving into the Ghanaian position, we have a very closed exception and limitations. And when you read our Section 9 of Act 690, it lists exceptions and limitations from exclusive economic rights. Now, because it does specific listings, which is very limited, anything that falls outside amounts to an infringement. And it has no room whatsoever for technology or any of these, very specific. And it's very obvious, and of course, we can be, it's understandable that the exceptions are linked to an analog system rather than the current technological system. So it does not make space for data mining in current technological world, and it limits how far we could use or utilize and capitalize on these in our searches and usages without flouting or being posed for copyright infringements along the line. So that is what I pose and study under our statutes, and I try to scrutinize and with a comparative study, draw lessons from them, not necessarily to go along the same way, but how well we could also consider any of them in conformance with a three-step test as we reframe our exceptions and limitations to accommodate any of these. So along these, I come up with some recommendations, though it's still work in progress, some recommendations so far on how well we can do that. And the first is to explicitly introduce text and data mining exception to expand the scope of our permitted uses to accommodate all that. And the rest are in the main paper, and over time I could do that. So thank you very much.